The rain wasn't just falling, it was waging a war against the world. It hammered on the roof of Liam's worn-out pickup truck, a relentless drumming that seemed to sync with the throbbing in his temples. Each drop that splattered against the windshield was like a tiny explosion, momentarily blurring the already treacherous back road into a smear of asphalt and shadow. It was the kind of night that made good people stay indoors, locked away with their families, their warmth, their lives. For Liam, it was just the lonely drive home after a 24-hour shift that had been too quiet, which was somehow worse than the chaotic ones. Silence meant waiting. Waiting for the alarm that signaled someone else's world was falling apart. Waiting for the call that would plunge him and his crew into fire or wreckage. The waiting gnawed at him, giving his thoughts too much room to roam, to drift back to other silences, other waits. The suffocating silence of a hospital waiting room. The final, deafening silence that had followed. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white under the faint green glow of the dashboard. The fire station, with its rough camaraderie and shared purpose, was a buffer against the quiet, but out here, alone in his truck, with only the storm for company. The silence was closing in, and he knew an even deeper, more profound silence was waiting for him at the end of this road. His house, no. It had stopped being a home 2 years ago as just a collection of rooms, holding nothing but echoes and dust motes dancing in slivers of moonlight. He had become a man who ran into burning buildings for a living, but was terrified of walking through his own front door. That's when he saw it. It wasn't much. A flicker of movement at the edge of his high beams, just where the manicured asphalt gave way to a muddy shoulder and a dense line of whispering pines. For a second, he dismissed it. A plastic bag caught in the wind, a possum darting for cover. His eyes were tired, gritty from smoke and lack of sleep. But something made him slow down, his foot easing off the accelerator. It was the unnaturalness of it. It hadn't been a scurry, it had been a desperate, feeble flap. He pulled the truck over, the tires crunching on the wet gravel. He left the engine running, the headlights cutting two perfect cones through the downpour. A part of him, the exhausted, cynical part, screamed at him to just keep driving. Go home. Lock the door. Forget you saw anything. It wasn't his problem. He had spent the last day being responsible for other people's problems. But the other part of him, the part that had chosen his profession, was already unbuckling his seatbelt. It was the part of him that couldn't ignore a cry for help. No matter how small or strange, the air outside was a shock to the system, cold and heavy with the smell of wet earth and pine. Rain instantly soaked his hair and ran in cold rivulets down his neck, plastering his thin station shirt to his skin. He walked toward the spot, his boots sinking slightly into the mud. And there it was, a brown cardboard box, the kind used for shipping packages, now sagging and dark with rain, its structural integrity failing. It looked like a piece of forgotten trash, something that had fallen off a truck. But as he got closer, he saw the source of the movement. One of the top flaps, heavy with water, was weakly pushing up and then falling back down. Flap. Pause. Flap. It was a pathetic, rhythmic plea, kneeling, heedless of the mud staining his jeans. Liam reached out a hesitant hand. His heart, which he'd thought was a dormant, heavy thing in his chest, began to beat a little faster, and he braced himself for anything a cornered animal, a nest of snakes. He gently peeled back the sodden flap. The sight within stole the breath from his lungs. It wasn't one animal, it was a pile, a tangle of tiny, trembling bodies, no bigger than his hand. Puppies, their fur, matted and dark with a mixture of mud and rain, was a kaleidoscope of blacks, browns, and whites. They were pressed together in a desperate, shivering mass, seeking a warmth that no longer existed. Their eyes were sealed shut, their tiny chests rising and falling in shallow, stuttered breaths. One of them, the one directly under the flap, let out a whimper so faint it was nearly lost in the storm, its head lolling to the side. They were dying. The word hit Liam with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't been left here to be found. They had been left here to be washed away, to be erased by the storm, discarded like trash. For a moment, he was frozen. The firefighter in him saw a scene of mass casualties, a situation beyond hope. The man in him felt a profound, gut-wrenching wave of rage and sorrow. The carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart didn't just crack. They shattered. All the loneliness, the grief, the emptiness he'd been fleeing from coalesced into a single, sharp point of focus on this box of dying creatures. He couldn't save his wife. He couldn't save his daughter. He spent his days fighting fires that were often too big, arriving at accidents that were already over. He was so often too late. Not this time, a voice whispered inside him. Fierce and unfamiliar. Not this time, without another thought. He shrugged off his thick firefighter's jacket. It was warm and dry on the inside, smelling faintly of smoke and coffee. It was his shield against the world. Gently, as if handling the most fragile of artifacts, he began to lift the puppies from their cardboard coffin, one by one, and nestle them into the jacket's quilted lining. 1, 2, 3. Each one was terrifyingly light, a featherweight of fading life. 4, 5, 6. One of them twitched, a minuscule spasm of a leg. 7. There were 7 of them. He gathered the jacket in his arms, cradling it to his chest as if it held the most precious cargo in the world. He turned his back to the wind, shielding them with his own body as he hurried back to the truck. The silence he had dreaded was gone, replaced by a singular, desperate mission. As he placed the jacket on the passenger seat and cranked the heat to full blast, he looked at the barely moving bundle. The truth of what had happened here, on this lonely road, was a dark and ugly mystery. But right now, only one truth mattered: they were alive. And he would be damned if he let them face the darkness alone. The truck, usually a lumbering beast of burden, felt like a precision instrument in Liam's hands. He navigated the slick, winding roads with a focus he typically reserved for maneuvering a fire engine through rush-hour traffic. Every red light was a personal affront. Every empty stretch of road a challenge to be conquered. The heater was blasting, filling the small cab with a dry, suffocating heat. But he didn't care. All that mattered was the fragile bundle on the passenger seat. He risked a glance over. The jacket was still. Too still. Were they even breathing? He couldn't tell. A fresh wave of panic, cold and sharp, pierced through his adrenaline. "Hang on," he murmured, his voice raspy. "Just hang on. We're almost there. I'm not letting you go." The words felt foreign in his own mouth. He hadn't spoken with such gentle urgency to anyone, or anything, in 2 years. Finally, a familiar blue and white sign cut through the rainy haze. Beacon Veterinary Clinic. 24-hour emergency care. It was a small, unassuming building, but tonight it looked like a cathedral, its windows glowing with the promise of sanctuary. He swerved into the parking lot, not even bothering to pull into a space properly. The truck coming to a halt at a haphazard angle. He scooped the jacket up, its weight seeming even more insignificant now, cradling it against his chest. He burst through the clinic door, a gust of wind and rain following him in. The reception area was empty, sterile, and smelled faintly of antiseptic and animal fear. A bell chimed somewhere in the back. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "I need help. It's an emergency." A door swung open and a man appeared, wiping his hands on a green scrub top. He was older than Liam, with tired, intelligent eyes set in a face etched with the lines of long hours and too much coffee. A name tag on his scrubs read, Dr. Eris Thorne. His expression was one of weary professionalism until his eyes fell on the sodden, muddy jacket in Liam's arms. "What have you got there, son?" Dr. Thorne asked, his voice calm and measured. "Puppies. I found them on the side of the road, in a box," Liam said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "They're not moving much. They're so cold." Dr. Thorne's expression tightened with a familiar, sad resignation. He'd seen this movie before, and it rarely had a happy ending. "All right, bring them through. Let's have a look." Liam followed him into an examination room, the heart of the clinic's quiet battle against time. The room was bright, clean, and filled with the metallic gleam of medical equipment. He gently placed the jacket on the stainless steel examination table and peeled back the lining. The 7 tiny bodies were laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights. If they had looked fragile in the darkness of his truck, here they looked utterly hopeless. They were skeletal, their ribs visible beneath their damp fur, their skin an unhealthy, pale pink. They barely looked like dogs. They looked like mistakes of nature. Unfinished and discarded, Dr. Thorne let out a long, slow sigh. He reached out a practiced hand, his touch incredibly gentle as he checked the gums of the nearest puppy. He listened to its chest with a small stethoscope, his brow furrowed in concentration. He moved from one to the next, his movements efficient, his face betraying nothing. Finally, he straightened up and looked at Liam, his eyes full of a pity that felt worse than condemnation. "They're hypothermic, severely dehydrated and malnourished. Their heart rates are dangerously faint. Neonates this young, in this condition, the odds are infinitesimally small." He gestured around the room. "Even with everything I have, here incubators, IV fluids, around-the-clock care, I can't promise anything. It would be a miracle if even one of them survives the night." The clinical, detached assessment hit Liam like a physical blow. He heard the unspoken words, "It's a waste of time. Let them go peacefully. It's the kindest thing." And something inside Liam, something that had been dormant for 2 years, roared to life. "No," he said. The word sharp and definite. Dr. Thorne raised an eyebrow. "Son, I understand you want to help, but you need to be realistic. I don't pay you to be realistic. I pay you to work miracles." Liam interrupted, his voice low and trembling with an intensity that surprised them both. He took a step closer to the table, positioning himself between the vet and the puppies as if to shield them. "Look at me. I'm a firefighter. I walk into hopeless situations every single day. If we gave up every time the odds were infinitesimally small, my whole damn city would have burned to the ground by now." He pointed a shaking finger at the smallest puppy, the one whose life seemed the most tenuous. "You see that one she's fighting? They're all fighting. They survived the cold, the rain, and whatever bastard left them to die, they've done their part. Now we have to do ours." He locked eyes with the weary vet, and for the first time, Dr. Thorne saw past the rain-soaked clothes and the desperate demeanor. He saw a man who wasn't just trying to save a litter of puppies. He was trying to save himself. There was a raw, gaping wound in this man's soul, and for some reason, these 7 fragile heartbeats were the only thing that could begin to stitch it closed. "Please," Liam whispered, the anger draining away, leaving only a raw, desperate plea. Don't let them die. I can't be too late again. Just try. Whatever it costs, I'll pay it." The silence in the room stretched for a long moment, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant drumming of the rain. Dr. Eris Thorne looked from Liam's haunted eyes to the pathetic pile of life on his table, and his own weariness seemed to recede, replaced by a spark of the idealism that had led him to this profession in the first place. He finally gave a short, decisive nod. "All right, firefighter," he said, a new energy in his voice as he started grabbing supplies. "You're not paying me for miracles. You're paying me to fight. Let's get to work. You wanted a hopeless situation. You've got one. Grab those towels, we need to get them warm. Now, the frantic race against the clock shifted into a tense, methodical battle for life for the next hour. They worked in a seamless, unspoken partnership. Liam, following the vet's instructions, gently but firmly rubbed each puppy with warm towels, stimulating their circulation. Dr. Eris prepared a warm, electrolyte-rich formula, carefully administering it drop by drop into each tiny mouth with a syringe. They placed the puppies into a glass-fronted incubator. A little bubble of warmth and hope against the storm raging outside and the despair that had brought them here. The vigil had begun, and as Liam watched the faint mist of their breath fog up the incubator's glass, he felt the first glimmer of something he hadn't felt in a very long time, a fragile, terrifying hope. The hours bled into one another, marked only by the rhythmic hum of the incubator and the slow retreat of the storm. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle, and the first hints of a bruised, gray dawn began to silhouette the pine trees inside the clinic. Time was a suspended, breathless thing. Liam hadn't moved from the stool he'd pulled up beside the incubator, his body running on a potent cocktail of caffeine, adrenaline, and sheer willpower. Dr. Eris had been a quiet, constant presence, moving with an economy of motion that spoke of decades of experience. He'd check the monitors, adjust the temperature by a fraction of a degree, and prepare more of the life-saving formula. He had, at one point, silently placed a mug of steaming black coffee into Liam's hands. Liam had taken it, his mumbled thanks swallowed by the quiet hum of the machines. A silent pact of shared purpose had formed between them in the small hours of the morning. Around 4 a.m., a small victory occurred. The puppies' body temperatures had stabilized. They were still dangerously weak, but they were no longer actively dying. The immediate, frantic crisis had passed, giving way to a new phase careful, painstaking observation. It was during this lull that Dr. Eris decided to perform a more thorough examination. Their skin is in better condition now that they're warm and hydrated, he explained, his voice low. I want to check for any other injuries or conditions we might have missed. He carefully opened the incubator and lifted out the largest of the litter, a puppy with patches of black and white fur. He placed it on a warm towel under the bright examination lamp. The puppy squirmed weakly, a definite sign of improvement. A small, tight knot of tension in Liam's chest loosened slightly. Dr. Eris ran his fingers expertly over the puppy's body, checking its limbs and belly. Then he paused, frowning as he examined the puppy's right ear. That's odd, he murmured, more to himself than to Liam. What is it? Liam asked, instantly alert, leaning forward on his stool. Come here, look at this. Liam moved to stand beside the vet, peering down at the tiny ear. At first, he saw nothing. But then, as Dr. Eris angled the ear towards the light, he saw it. It was an incredibly faint marking, etched into the delicate skin on the inside of the ear flap. It wasn't a tattoo with ink, but rather a tiny, precise symbol that looked almost like a brand or a scar. It was a perfect, small circle with a single, straight line through the middle. Is it a birthmark? Liam asked, though he knew it wasn't. The lines were too clean, too deliberate. No, Dr. Eris said, his voice tight with a new kind of concern. I've seen markings from breeders before, usually tattoos for identification, but this is different, and it's on all of them. He gently placed the first puppy back in the incubator and took out another. This one a solid brown color. He checked its right ear. There it was again. The exact same symbol, in the exact same place. He checked a third and a fourth. Every single one of them bore the identical, cryptic mark. It's like a production line, Liam said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Precisely. Dr. Eris agreed, his expression growing darker. As he examined the fifth puppy, he paused again, this time bringing its fur closer to his nose and inhaling sharply. That smell. I thought it was just wet dog. Liam said, it was, at first, but now that they're dry and clean. He beckoned Liam closer. Smell. Liam leaned in. The cloying, sweet smell of the puppy formula was there, but underneath it, clinging stubbornly to the fine fur, was another scent. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but sharp and sterile. It was the clean, biting odor of chemicals, something that reminded Liam of the industrial solvents used to clean equipment after a chemical fire. It didn't belong on a living creature. Dr. Eris carefully took a small pair of scissors and snipped a tiny lock of fur, placing it in a sterile plastic baggie. I'll run a preliminary analysis on this myself. He placed the last puppy back in the warmth of the incubator and turned to face Liam, leaning back against the steel counter. The weariness had returned to his eyes, but it was now mixed with a cold, simmering anger that mirrored Liam's own. Okay, firefighter, he said, his voice losing its clinical detachment. We need to talk. What we're looking at here is not what you think it is. What do you mean? This wasn't some poor family who couldn't afford to keep a litter. This wasn't some kid who made a mistake and panicked. Dr. Eris explained, his words deliberate and heavy. The identical markings suggest a large-scale operation, one where animals are cataloged and tracked. The chemical smell, that suggests a desperate attempt to sterilize them, to wash away evidence of where they came from, or perhaps to mask the scent of illness. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. You put it together, and a very ugly picture begins to form. An operation like that, they're not breeding for pets, they're breeding for profit, for perfection. And when you breed for perfection, you don't tolerate mistakes. The pieces clicked into place in Liam's mind, each one colder and sharper than the last. The isolated road, the box thrown away like refuse, the systematic nature of it all. So, what are you saying? Liam asked. Though he already knew the answer, he needed to hear it out loud. Dr. Eris looked him straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering. I'm saying these puppies weren't just abandoned. Liam? They were culled. They were judged to be defective, imperfect, and worthless to the person who bred them. They were a failed batch. And they were disposed of like industrial waste. The room, which had felt like a sanctuary of hope just moments before, suddenly felt cold and sinister. The quiet hum of the incubator now sounded like a countdown. Liam looked through the glass at the 7 tiny, sleeping forms, each bearing a mark that had sealed their fate. His mission, he realized with chilling certainty, had just changed. It was no longer just about keeping them alive. It was about finding the monster who treated life as a commodity and justice as an inconvenience. 2 days later, Liam's house was unrecognizable. The sterile silence that had haunted its rooms for 2 years had been conquered by an army of tiny, demanding life forms. His minimalist living room now looked like a cross between a nursery and a field hospital. Soft blankets and heating pads covered every available surface. A neat row of feeding syringes and bottles of puppy formula stood on his coffee table, which he had meticulously disinfected. The air, once stale with loneliness, was now thick with the scent of milk replacer and the faint, squeaking whimpers of the 7 puppies. They were still impossibly fragile, but they were alive, under Dr. Eris's strict guidance. Liam had been allowed to bring them home, transforming him into a round-the-clock nurse. He barely slept, waking every 2 hours for feedings. His life governed by a new, relentless rhythm. The exhaustion was bone deep, but it was different from the weary emptiness he was used to. This was the exhaustion of purpose, as is the way in a small town like Northwood Creek. The story had taken on a life of its own. Hero Firefighter saves 7 dying pups from storm. A short, feel-good piece had run on the local news website, complete with a grainy cell phone photo someone had snapped of Liam leaving the vet clinic. He hated the attention, but it was an unavoidable consequence of his actions. He was in the middle of a delicate feeding operation with the smallest puppy, the one he'd started thinking of as Hope, when the doorbell rang. The sound was so unexpected it made him jump, causing Hope to lose her latch on the syringe. He sighed, wiped a drop of milk from her chin, and went to the door. Peering through the peephole, standing on his porch was Fire Chief Thomas Miller, a man who was as much a town landmark as the old clock tower in the square. Chief Miller was built like a retired linebacker, with a full head of silver hair and a face that seemed permanently set in a look of paternal wisdom. He'd been Liam's boss for 10 years, and in the early days after the accident, had been a pillar of quiet support. Liam opened the door. "Chief, what are you doing here? Heard you were running a full-scale rescue operation over here," Miller said, his voice a familiar, friendly baritone. He held up a cardboard box from the town's best bakery. "Figured you could use some fuel." "You didn't have to do that, Chief. Come on in." Miller stepped inside, his large frame seeming to fill the hallway. His eyes scanned the organized chaos of the living room, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, you really went and did it. Son, the whole town's talking about it. You're a hero." "I'm not a hero," Liam said quietly, closing the door. "I just couldn't leave them." "That's what heroes do," Miller insisted. Placing the box of pastries on the kitchen counter, he walked over to the makeshift nursery, peering down at the sleeping bundles. "They're a scruffy-looking bunch, aren't they? But they're fighters, just like you." The praise felt good. Reassuring. For a moment, Liam felt a surge of relief, thinking he could confide in his mentor. "There's something more to it, Chief," he began, his voice low. "The vet and we think it wasn't just some random person. They all have these strange markings on their ears, identical ones, and they smelled of chemicals, like someone tried to scrub them clean." He watched the chief's face for a reaction. For a split second, Miller's friendly smile tightened. It was almost imperceptible. A fleeting shadow that passed over his eyes before the warm, paternal mask slipped back into place. "Is that so?" Miller said, his tone still light, but with a new, harder edge underneath. "Well, that's a job for Sheriff Brody and his deputies. Wouldn't you say animal cruelty is their department? You've done your part. Liam? More than your part. I know, but you're a firefighter." Miller cut in, turning to face him fully. His gaze was direct, fatherly, but his words felt heavy. "Your job is saving people, putting out fires. It's a demanding job, one that requires your full attention. You can't get bogged down in distractions." The word distractions hung in the air. Feeling strangely dismissive, Liam's nascent suspicion began to stir. "I don't think finding out who did this is a distraction," he said carefully. Chief Miller sighed. A theatrical sound of a patient man dealing with a stubborn subordinate. He walked over to Liam and put a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me, son. Northwood Creek is a good town. We're a community. We don't have monsters running around, dumping puppies in ditches. It was probably some teenagers who got scared. You start pointing fingers, digging around in things you don't understand. You can cause a lot of trouble for innocent people." The condescension in his tone was unmistakable now. Liam felt a prickle of defiance. And what if they're not innocent? The chief's hand squeezed his shoulder, the pressure just a little too firm to be friendly. His voice dropped, becoming a low, confidential murmur. "Liam, you've been through a lot. Everyone knows it. And everyone respects the hell out of you. But trust me on this. You need to focus on getting yourself right. Focus on your job. Let this go." He leaned in closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Some things are better left alone," The words landed with the chilling finality of a closing door. It wasn't advice, it wasn't a suggestion. It was an order, wrapped in the guise of fatherly concern. Chief Miller seemed to sense he'd pushed enough. He released Liam's shoulder and stepped back, his friendly smile back in place as if nothing had happened. "All right, I'll let you get back to it. Don't let those pastries get stale. And Liam, get some rest. You look like hell." He gave a final nod and let himself out. Liam stood frozen in his living room, the echo of the chief's words reverberating in the quiet space. He looked from the closed front door to the 7 fragile lives sleeping peacefully in their warm beds. The chief's visit hadn't brought comfort. It had brought a cold, creeping dread. Why was the head of the town's fire department so invested in stopping a simple animal cruelty investigation? Why did he use the exact same phrase, "better left alone," that felt more like a line from a mob movie than advice from a mentor? The ugly picture Dr. Aris had painted in his mind began to expand, its borders stretching to encompass figures and institutions he had always trusted. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather snaked its way down his spine. He was no longer just searching for a cruel individual. He was standing at the edge of something far bigger and far more corrupt. And a man he had once looked up to had just drawn a very clear line in the sand. Chief Miller's visit left a toxic residue in the air, a film of unease that clung to everything. But Liam had no time to dwell on it. The demands of his 7 tiny charges were absolute, a relentless tide that pulled him away from the dark undertow of suspicion and back to the tangible world of warmth. Milk and life, his life, once defined by long stretches of emptiness punctuated by the blare of an alarm, was now segmented into 2-hour intervals. The alarm on his phone would go off, a gentle chime that was a world away from the station's klaxon, and the ritual would begin. He'd test the temperature of the formula on his wrist, fill the 7 syringes, and start with the strongest of the litter. A feisty black puppy that would latch on with surprising strength. He moved through the process with a firefighter's methodical precision. Feed 1, burp 1, clean 1. Place it back on the warm bedding. Move to the next. The work was repetitive, exhausting, and utterly consuming, and somewhere in the middle of the 3rd sleepless night, as he watched the puppies huddle together in a contented, milk-drunk pile, he realized something profound. The silence was gone, the crushing weight of his empty house. The very thing he used to dread had lifted. His loneliness hadn't been cured, it had been outnumbered. The ghosts of his past were still there, lurking in the quiet corners of his mind. But their whispers were drowned out by the squeaks and whimpers and the undeniable, demanding presence of new life. His grief had been a stagnant pool, but now, this fierce protective energy was a current, forcing the water to move, to flow. He was no longer just a man haunted by what he had lost. He was a man defined by what he was fighting to save. On the 4th day, he decided they needed names. Calling them Number 1 or the Brown One felt as cold and detached as the person who had marked them for death. They were individuals, with tiny, budding personalities. The strong black one who always ate first. He named Cole. A mostly white one with a single dark patch over his eye became Patch. A shy, quiet female who liked to burrow under the others was Shadow. There was Rocky, a sturdy gray-pelted male. Pip, short for Pipsqueak. The runt before Hope, and Copper, for the reddish tint in his brown fur. The names were simple, grounded in reality. A small act of defiance against the cryptic. Cold symbol etched into their ears. But the last one, the smallest and most fragile, remained nameless for the longest time. She was the one he worried about constantly. She had the least energy. Her suckling reflex was weak, and there were several terrifying moments when he'd had to rub her vigorously to stimulate her breathing. She was the embodiment of the razor's edge they were all living on, every time he picked her up. His large, calloused hands felt clumsy and enormous around her bird-like frame. He spent the most time with her, patiently squeezing single drops of formula onto her tongue, whispering words of encouragement. "Come on, little fighter. You can do this. Just a little more." One evening, after a particularly difficult feeding, he held her in the palm of his hand, her tiny body barely making an indentation. He had done everything Dr. Eris had told him to, yet she seemed to be fading, her breathing shallow. Despair, cold and familiar, began to creep back in. Chief Miller's words echoed in his head. Let it go. Some things are better left alone. Was this what he meant? That some fights were destined to be lost? He felt a tear he didn't know he'd been holding back slide down his cheek and splash onto her tiny head. And then, something happened. She stirred. Her miniature pink tongue emerged and, with painstaking effort, licked the single drop of salty water from her fur. Then she shifted, pressing her face into the warmth of his palm with a faint, contented sigh. It was the smallest of gestures. A barely perceptible movement. But it hit Liam with the force of a revelation. She wasn't giving up. And if she wasn't giving up, then how could he? Hope, he whispered, the name feeling more like a prayer. Your name is Hope. In that moment, the entire battle crystallized around this one tiny creature. Every drop of milk he coaxed into her was a rebellion. Every steady breath she took was a victory. His abstract anger at the injustice, his simmering suspicion of the chief. All of it now had a face. It had 7 faces, but Hope's was the one that burned brightest in his mind. He now understood that Chief Miller's warning wasn't just about avoiding trouble. It was an attempt to get him to accept the unacceptable, that the powerful could decide who was worthless. That the inconvenient could be discarded without a second thought. Looking at Hope, so fragile yet so determined, Liam knew that accepting that worldview would be a betrayal far greater than disobeying an order. These 7 fragile lives were no longer just a rescue. They were his reason. They were the undeniable, breathing, whimpering proof that no life was worthless, and he would tear down anyone, no matter how respected or powerful, who dared to suggest otherwise. His obsession was no longer just a thought, it was a promise. Sealed in a quiet living room, to a tiny puppy who had just licked a tear from his hand, Of course, here's the remainder of the story, beginning with Chapter 6, written continuously in English as requested, with the puppy's fragile lives now stabilized. A portion of Liam's mind was freed from the role of full-time nurse and returned to that of a reluctant investigator. The image of the cryptic symbol, the perfect circle bisected by a single line, was seared into his mind. A cold brand of calculated cruelty. He knew he couldn't go to Sheriff Brody. Chief Miller's warning had made it clear that official channels were compromised, or at the very least, untrustworthy. He was on his own, seated at his laptop, with the faint, mewling sounds of the puppies as his soundtrack. Liam began the hunt. He searched for phrases like breeder identification marks, puppy ear markings, lineage tracking symbols. For hours, he fell down a rabbit hole of dog show forums, kennel club websites, and articles on breeding regulations. Most of it referred to registry tattoos or microchips official. Traceable methods. Nothing matched the subtle scar on his puppy's ears. He was close to giving up, his eyes aching from staring at the screen, when he stumbled upon a post buried deep in an obscure forum for professional dog handlers. An anonymous user was complaining about high-end breeders using internal markers to track undesirable genetic lines before they were ever officially registered. It was a way to identify and eliminate puppies with flaws, anything from an off-color patch of fur to potential health issues, before they could taint a kennel's perfect reputation. Liam's heart hammered. He read on. The user described a few of these markers, and then he saw it. Some places use a simple circle with a line through it, like their own private no symbol. A cold dread washed over him. Beneath the post, another comment had been added. Sounds like a Viridian Kennels operation. They're obsessed with perfection. Viridian Kennels. The name sounded grand and pristine. A quick search opened a slick, professionally designed website filled with perfectly lit photographs of champion Labradors and Golden Retrievers posing on manicured lawns. Their tagline was, "Where perfection is bred." The facility was on the edge of town, a sprawling estate hidden behind wrought iron fences and tall cypress trees. It was renowned among Northwood Creek's elite, a place where owning a Viridian puppy was a status symbol, like a luxury car or a country club membership. The owner was a man named Richard Jennings, a wealthy, charismatic entrepreneur who was at every charity fundraiser and on a first-name basis with every powerful figure in town, including Liam suspected, Fire Chief Miller. Liam knew he couldn't storm in making accusations. He had to be smart. The next day, he put on his best clothes, a button-down shirt and khaki pants he usually only wore for formal functions, and drove his pickup to the imposing gates of Viridian Kennels. He felt out of place and fraudulent, but he pushed the feeling down. He buzzed the gate, and a smooth, cultured voice answered over the intercom. "Viridian Kennels, how may I help you?" "Yes, hello," Liam said, forcing his voice to sound confident and affluent. "My name is Liam Carter. I'm interested in inquiring about a puppy." After a slight pause, the heavy iron gates hummed and swung open, inviting him into another world. The long, white gravel driveway snaked through impossibly green lawns. The main facility looked more like a country manor than a kennel. It was sterile in its cleanliness. There wasn't a stray dog hair, not a single errant bark. The silence here was different from the silence of his empty home. This was a controlled, imposed silence. Richard Jennings came out to greet him. He was just as Liam had imagined, tall, tan, with a perfectly coiffed head of silver hair and a smile so white it was almost blinding. He wore an expensive polo shirt and exuded an easy charm designed to disarm. "Mr. Carter, welcome to Viridian," Jennings said, shaking Liam's hand with a firm grip. "Always a pleasure to meet a true enthusiast. Thank you for seeing me." Liam returned. "Your facility is impressive. We believe the finest environment produces the finest companions," Jennings said smoothly. Beginning the tour, everything was frighteningly perfect. The runs were spacious and immaculate. The adult dogs they passed were stunning specimens, lounging regally. But as Liam looked into their eyes, he didn't see the joy or mischief he was beginning to see in his own pups. He saw a placid, almost vacant calmness. "We're very strict with our protocols," Jennings explained as they passed an area with charts and schedules on the wall. "Nutrition, exercise, lineage. Everything is tracked to the finest detail. There is no room for error." "So, how do you identify your puppies?" Liam asked casually, trying to keep his voice even. "Before they're old enough for microchips?" Jennings' smile didn't falter, but Liam caught a flicker of guardedness in his eyes. "We have a meticulous internal record-keeping system. Every litter is carefully monitored." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. I've heard of different methods." Jennings stopped beside a particular enclosure where a beautiful golden retriever lay, with a litter of plump, healthy puppies. They were tumbling over one another. A perfect picture of vitality. "As you can see, we produce only the best. Our lines are flawless. We don't have weak or defective dogs at Viridian." His words were a slap in the face, conjuring the image of hope trembling in his palm. As the tour concluded and they headed back to the main building, Liam noticed a door labeled "Supply and Sanitation." Through the briefly opened door, he caught a glimpse of stacked blue industrial drums. On the label of one, he could just make out a single word: Bioscrub. It wasn't a brand he knew, but it sounded industrial, chemical. Jennings handed him a glossy brochure and a dauntingly long waiting list. "Give it some thought. Mr. Carter, a Viridian dog is an investment for life. As Liam drove away from those gates, leaving the world of artificial perfection behind, he had no concrete proof. He had no confession, but he had a cold certainty in his gut. He had smelled the lie behind Jennings's smile, felt the emptiness behind the gilded cages, and seen the cruelty inherent in an obsession with perfection. He had found the monster, and the monster was hiding behind a wall of wealth, power, and respectability. This fight was going to be much harder than he had ever imagined. Sleep did not come to Liam that night. He sat in the dim light of his living room. The sterile perfection of Viridian kennels and the false smile of Richard Jennings playing on a loop in his mind. He had looked up bioscrub online and confirmed his worst fears. It wasn't a household cleaner. It was an industrial-grade chemical solvent, used in laboratories and agricultural facilities to eradicate stubborn pathogens. To use it on newborn puppies was not just bizarre, it was monstrously reckless. He looked over at the corner of the room, where 7 tiny lives slept in the warm nest he had made. They were the living embodiment of everything Jennings disdained: imperfection, fragility, the randomness of nature. They were the errors that Jennings's system was designed to eliminate. And now, they were Liam's dangerous secret. Around 11 p.m., his phone buzzed. It was Dr. Aris. "Liam, sorry to call so late," the vet's voice said, a note of urgency in it. "I was just reviewing Hope's weight chart. I don't like the way it's plateauing. I have a higher calorie formula I want to get her on immediately. Can you swing by the clinic and pick it up?" "Of course," Liam said instantly, without hesitation. "I'm on my way. Anything for Hope?" He checked on the pups one last time. All were sound asleep, the heating pad casting a soft orange glow. He would only be gone 30, maybe 40 minutes. He deadbolted the back door and hurried out into the cool night. The trip to the clinic and back was swift. Dr. Aris was waiting with the new formula and a few words of instruction as Liam turned back onto his own quiet street. A strange sense of unease began to prickle at him. He had turned the front porch light off before he left. He was sure of it, but now it was on, casting a weak, ghostly glow on the front lawn. His heart began to pound. He killed his headlights and pulled the truck to a stop down the street from his house. He got out quietly, the training of a firefighter accustomed to quickly assessing dangerous situations taking over. The front door. It looked secure, but as he rounded the house to the back, an icy dread shot through him. The back door, the one he had explicitly locked, was now slightly ajar. He pushed the door. It creaked open. Inside, the house was silent or wrong. Heavy silence, different from the peaceful quiet he had left behind. Stepping into the kitchen, he flicked on the light. His breath caught in his chest. The room had been tossed. Cupboard doors hung open. Cereal and pasta spilled across the floor. But the intruder hadn't been looking for food. They had been looking for something else. With fear rising in his throat, he bolted for the living room. The scene was one of calculated violation. This was not a robbery, it was a targeted invasion. His expensive flat-screen TV and his laptop were untouched, but the cushions on his couch had been slashed open, white stuffing spilling out like entrails. The framed photos on the mantel, his only precious memories of his wife and daughter, had been swept to the floor. The glass shattered. It was a deliberate act of violence, designed to terrorize, to break his sense of safety. And then his eyes fell on the puppy's corner. A choked sob escaped Liam. His heart fractured. The soft blankets had been thrown across the room. The heating pad was unplugged, its comforting orange light extinguished. And the puppies were no longer in their nest. They were scattered, whimpering and shivering pitifully in the dark corners of the room. This was the message, as clear as if it had been written in blood on the wall. "We know you visited. We know you're sniffing around. And we can get to what you love whenever we want." Liam's initial shock was immediately consumed by a cold, white-hot rage. He didn't think of calling the police. The image of Chief Miller, with his paternal smile and his veiled warning. Flashed in his mind. What would he do? File a report and tell him to leave it alone? No, he was on his own. His first priority was the puppies. He got down on his knees, carefully gathering each trembling creature. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice hoarse with fury. "It's okay, I'm here." They were alive. That was the only miracle. Terrified, cold, but alive, he found Hope cowering under the sofa, shaking uncontrollably. He gently scooped her up, holding her against his chest, feeling her tiny, racing heartbeat against his own. This act of intimidation was Jennings's grave tactical error. It was designed to extinguish Liam's investigation with fear. It did the opposite. It turned an investigation into a personal war. They had crossed a line. They had brought violence into his home, had targeted the innocent, helpless creatures he had sworn to protect, standing in the wreckage of his home, clutching hope. Liam felt his fear crystallize into something hard and sharp as a diamond. He was no longer a grieving man trying to find his purpose. He was a firefighter, and there was a fire that needed to be put out. A fire of greed, corruption, and cruelty that was smoldering beneath the peaceful surface of his town, and he was going to be the one to extinguish it, even if he had to burn down Richard Jennings's entire world to do it. Liam's rage was a cold fire, burning away his fear and forging it into steel-hard resolve. He couldn't stay in the house. His sanctuary had been violated, turned into a threat, acting on instinct. He began to move with the methodical efficiency of a firefighter securing a scene. He found a large plastic bin, lined it with the few remaining clean blankets, and carefully placed each shivering puppy inside, securing the lid but leaving a gap for air. He grabbed the new formula from the kitchen, threw a few personal items into a backpack, and didn't look back at the chaotic ruin of his living room. There was only one place he could go. One person in this town he trusted implicitly. Minutes later, he was back at the veterinary clinic, his truck's headlights cutting a swath across the dark windows. He banged on the glass door, a sharp, urgent rhythm in the night's quiet. After a moment, a light flicked on, and a sleepy Dr. Eris, wearing a bathrobe over his pajamas, appeared and unlocked the door. "Liam, what is it? Is it Hope?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. "It's not Hope," Liam said, his voice frighteningly level. He stepped inside, carrying the plastic bin. "They're okay, but someone broke into my house?" Dr. Eris was instantly awake. His worried expression shifted to one of sharp alarm as he took in Liam's stone-hard face in the makeshift. Damaged blankets lining the bin. "Get inside," he said, locking the door behind them. "Tell me everything." In the sterile examination room, under the cold fluorescent lights, Liam told the story. He was clinical, unemotional. He described the visit to Viridian Kennels, the tense exchange with Jennings, and then the return home to calculated destruction, the slashed cushions, the broken photos, and worst of all, the targeted terrorizing of the puppies. Dr. Eris listened in silence, his face growing darker with every word. When Liam was finished, the older vet let out a long, heavy sigh, a breath that seemed to carry the weight of years of unspoken suspicion. "I was afraid of this," Dr. Eris said softly. "When you said you went there, I had a bad feeling. Jennings doesn't take kindly to threats against his little empire." He paused, then looked directly at Liam. "I finished the analysis on that fur sample." Liam felt his gut tighten. "And it's exactly what we suspected," Dr. Eris said, walking to a computer in the corner and pulling up a file that displayed a complex chemical analysis. "It's not a common disinfectant. The trade name is Bio-Scrub 7. It's an industrial-grade virucide. You don't find this in a pet store or even most vet clinics. It's used in research facilities and large-scale agricultural operations to completely eradicate everything, especially highly contagious viruses like parvo." He turned back to face Liam, his gaze sharp. There is no good reason to use this on live puppies. It's harsh, capable of causing chemical burns. The only reason to do it is if you're trying to scrub all evidence of a disease outbreak from an unsanitary facility. If you're running a puppy mill and a litter gets sick, you don't treat them. You discard them. And you bleach the place with something like this so the next batch isn't affected. The proof was there, cold and irrefutable. The puppies hadn't just been deemed imperfect, they were likely sick. And Jennings had disposed of them to cover up an outbreak that would have ruined his flawless reputation. Then, Dr. Eris confessed. "Liam," he began, his voice now a tired admission. "I've suspected Richard Jennings and Viridian Kennels for years." He told Liam about the pieces he'd collected over time. A former employee who quit abruptly, whispering of back rooms and animals that just disappeared. A few rare cases over the years of purebred puppies found in strange states of health that he could never explain. The whispers in the veterinary community about Jennings's almost impossible success rates and his refusal to allow independent inspections. But it was all just whispers and fragments, Dr. Eris concluded. Frustration etched on his face. Nothing concrete, nothing provable. Richard Jennings is a beloved man in this town. He donates to politicians, to the sheriff's department, to your fire department. To go against him without an ironclad case is to scream into a hurricane. No one will believe you, and he will ruin you for trying. Liam looked at the older man and saw a reflection of his own frustration. They were both alone, knowing the truth but powerless to prove it to a world that didn't want to listen. But tonight, something had changed. "You're not alone anymore," Liam said, his voice firm. "And neither am I." Dr. Eris looked at Liam, then at the bin where the puppies slept, and finally at the chemical analysis on his computer screen. The caution and weariness in his eyes were slowly replaced by a long extinguished spark of resolve. Jennings had gone too far. The break-in, that act of violence, was proof that they were close to the truth. "No," Dr. Eris said, a thin, determined smile touching his lips. "We're not." An alliance was formed in the quiet of the vet clinic, forged in mutual danger and shared purpose. They were done reacting. It was time to go on the offensive. "You mentioned a former employee," Liam said, his mind already shifting into planning mode. "The one who whispered about the back rooms. Are you still in contact with them?" Dr. Eris nodded. "I can find her. She was terrified. But maybe, just maybe, knowing she's not alone anymore will make her willing to talk." "Good," Liam said. "That's where we start. We need to find out what Jennings is hiding in those rooms." The fight was no longer Liam's alone. It was now theirs. And as dawn began to break over Northwood Creek, the two men, a firefighter and a veterinarian, began to plot the downfall of a king and his rotten empire. Dr. Eris found her. Her name was Clara, a young woman with perpetually nervous eyes who had worked at Viridian Kennels as a vet tech for nearly a year before quitting abruptly. Citing personal reasons, they met in secret, at a quiet diner in the next town over, a place where no one would recognize them. Clara was terrified at first. Her hands trembled as she held her coffee cup, her eyes darting constantly toward the door. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Richard Jennings is not someone you cross. He has connections everywhere. He could ruin my life." Liam patiently told her his story. He described finding the puppies in the storm, their fight for life, the break-in at his home, when he spoke of hope, of her tiny body fighting to live. He saw something shift in Clara's eyes. Her fear was being crowded out by a simmering anger. "You saved them," she said, in a voice of near disbelief. "Usually no one ever finds them." Spurred by Liam's courage, Clara broke her silence. She had no physical proof. She had been too scared to take anything when she left. But she knew where the secrets were kept. She told them of a private, unmarked office in the basement of the main building, where Jennings conducted his real business. Inside that office, There was a private, password-protected server where he kept the unofficial records, the true records. He's obsessed with his image. Clara explained. Everything the public sees the accounting. The lineage records, it's all pristine. But on that server, that's where he tracks everything. The losses, as he calls them. What's the password? Liam asked. I'm not 100% sure, but I overheard him mutter it once when he thought no one was around. Clara said, it's stupid, arrogant, just like him. It's triumphant one. With the number 1, she also told them about the discard room. It wasn't its official name, but it was what the staff called it. A cold, white-tiled room at the back of the facility where unwanted litters were taken. I was never allowed inside, she said, a shiver running through her. But I saw them take the cardboard boxes and carry empty ones out, armed with this dangerous knowledge. Liam and Aris made their plan. Clara told them that Jennings always attended his Rotary Club meeting on Thursday nights, from 7 until 10. That was their window the following Thursday night. Liam and Aris found themselves huddled in the shadows near the back fence of Viridian Kennels. Liam, dressed in all black, felt a familiar tension, like the quiet just before breaking down a door in a fire. Using a pair of bolt cutters, he made a clean, quiet snip through the chain-link fence at a known camera blind spot. They slipped onto the grounds, moving from shadow to shadow with practiced silence. Liam expertly picked the lock on a rear service door, his knowledge coming not just from breaking down doors, but from understanding how they were built. The basement was damp and smelled of bleach. They found the unmarked office just as Clara had described it. The lock was more complex here, but after several tense minutes with Eris standing watch, Liam got it open. Jennings's office was cold and minimalist. It contained a desk, a chair, and a computer tower humming quietly beneath it. Liam sat down, feeling Jennings's phantom presence in the room. He booted up the computer. A login screen appeared. Liam typed, "Triumphant." He hit enter for a second. Nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the desktop appeared. The desktop held only a few folders. One was labeled Financials, another, Lineage Records Official, and a third, innocuous-looking folder, was labeled Internal. There it is, Eris whispered. Liam double-clicked on the internal folder. Inside was a meticulously organized nightmare. Dozens of subfolders, each named with a letter code. He clicked on a random one. It contained a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet listed 8 puppies, next to 6 of them. In a column headed Status was a green V for Viable. Next to the remaining 2 was a Stark. Red D for Discard. In a Notes column, the reasons were listed in a cold. Clinical script, white marking on chest, undersized. They opened folder after folder. The picture grew more and more horrific. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of red Ds glowed on the screen. It was a digital graveyard, an indictment of industrial-scale cruelty. And then they found the folder labeled D-Documentation. Liam's heart stopped. Inside were not spreadsheets. They were photos, hundreds of photos, taken under harsh fluorescent light on a cold metal table. Photos of the discards, puppies with the most minor of flaws, the wrong patch of color, a slightly crooked tail, ears that didn't sit just right. Many of them were simply smaller than their littermates. Just like Hope, they were photographed like defective items on an assembly line. This is where Liam truly began to break. The rage that had carried him this far began to dissolve, replaced by a paralyzing horror. This was not the act of a single monster. It was worse. It was the work of an accountant, an executive, someone who had reduced life and death to an entry in a ledger. Aris put a hand on Liam's shoulder. Liam, there's more. He pointed to the financials folder with trembling hands. Liam opened it. It contained bank statements and spreadsheets tracking donations and PR expenses. He scanned the list of payments, and then he saw it, a recurring monthly payment, sent to a consulting firm named Miller Community Safety. The recipient, Thomas Miller, his fire chief, his mentor. That was the final blow. Liam's world shattered. The final wall protecting him from the raw truth of the world crumbled. The corruption wasn't just one evil man, it was a system. It was the head of his fire department, probably the sheriff's department, and God knew who else in the town he had called home. They all knew. Or they were being paid not to know. Kindness, justice, honor. All the words suddenly sounded like childish lies. He didn't feel anger anymore. He felt nothing. A void. An emptiness deeper and colder than any loneliness he had ever known. He had thought he was fighting a dragon. Instead, he'd found that the entire kingdom was poisoned, and he was just a fool with a wooden sword. He sat there, staring at the screen, at the faces of the numberless, nameless victims and the names of their respected accomplices. He had found the truth, and it broke him. The emptiness swallowed Liam. He sat motionless before the computer screen, his eyes blankly taking in the evidence of a systematic evil his mind couldn't fully process. The hum of the computer was the only sound in the room, a constant drone for the countless lives that had been extinguished. It was Dr. Eris who broke the spell, recognizing Liam's state of shock. The older veterinarian took action. Liam, look at me, he said, his voice firm but gentle. We have to go. Now. Liam didn't respond. He was frozen, a statue of disillusionment. Eris wasted no time. He produced a portable external hard drive from his pocket, plugged it in, and with a few practiced clicks, began copying the entire contents of Jennings's secret server. The blue progress bar crept slowly across the screen. Each percentage point another piece of the horrific truth being secured. We have the proof, Eris whispered urgently, as much to himself as to Liam. We have everything. Now we have to get out of here, when the copy was complete. Eris ejected the drive, pocketing it deep in his coat. He had to physically pull Liam up from the chair. Liam's movements were stiff, robotic, like a sleepwalker. They slipped out of the office, locking the door behind them, and made their way back into the dark grounds of Viridian Kennels, the night's silence now seeming to hold its own mute accusation, back in the relative safety of the veterinary clinic. The full weight of their discovery crashed down upon Liam. He sat on a stool, his head in his hands. Not in anger, but in complete and utter despair. What's the point? Eris, he said, his voice a hoarse. Dead thing. We have proof, so what? Who do we take it to Sheriff Brody? He's probably on the payroll too. We saw Miller's name. This whole town. It's rotten to the core. He looked up at his friend, his eyes a chasm of defeat. We can't win. The system is designed to protect people like him. Not people like us. Dr. Eris, though deeply shaken himself, retained a spark of fight. Then we go around the system, he asserted. We don't go to the local cops. There's a state animal welfare agency. They have their own investigators. They aren't beholden to small-town politics. They have to listen. Dubious. Liam nonetheless agreed. It was a sliver of a hope. And he clung to it only because Eris asked him to. 2 days later, they made the tents. Silent drive to the state capitol. They sat in a featureless government office, across from a man named Agent Reynolds, an investigator with the State Animal Welfare Division. Reynolds seemed professional and attentive. He listened to their story with a serious expression, nodding in the appropriate places. These are very serious accusations, Reynolds said when they had finished. We have proof, Eris said, placing the portable hard drive on the desk between them. Everything is in there. The logs, the photos, the financial records, including the payments to Northwood Creek's fire chief, Thomas Miller. Agent Reynolds picked up the drive, weighing it in his hand as if it were a grenade. "I will personally see to this," he promised. "We will launch a full investigation. Do not speak of this to anyone else. Let us do our jobs." Leaving the government building. For the first time in days, Liam felt a tiny, unwanted flicker of hope. Maybe Eris was right. Maybe the system wasn't completely broken after all. That flicker of hope lasted exactly 48 hours. Liam was at the clinic, helping Eris feed Hope, who was now starting to gain weight steadily, when a familiar vehicle pulled up sharply outside. It was the fire chief's official SUV. Liam felt an icy dread snake down his spine. Thomas Miller entered the clinic without knocking. His paternal facade was completely gone. In its place was the cold, hard face of a man used to giving orders and being obeyed. He didn't look at Eris. His eyes were locked on Liam. "We need to talk," Miller said, his voice devoid of warmth. Alone. Liam handed Hope to Eris and followed Miller outside. They stood beside Miller's SUV, the air thick with tension. Miller didn't waste words. He reached into his coat pocket and produced an object, the portable hard drive. He tossed it at Liam, who fumbled to catch it. "Your investigation is over," Miller said, his voice like ice. "No evidence was found to substantiate your wild claims. The case is closed." "How?" Liam stammered, his mind reeling. "We gave it to Reynolds, the state." Miller let out a short, nasty laugh. "Did you really think you were the first person to try and cause trouble for Richard Jennings? Did you really think a broken-down firefighter and an old vet could topple a man who has spent 20 years building relationships and buying loyalty? Jennings's money isn't just in this town. Son, it's everywhere." The ugly truth slammed into Liam. Reynolds hadn't been a savior. He was just another cog in the machine. One phone call from a powerful political donor like Jennings was all it took to kill any investigation before it even began. "This is your final warning." "Liam," Miller said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to an unmistakable threat. "You have a good job, a pension. Don't throw it all away. Go home. Take care of those dogs, and forget any of this ever happened. If I hear one more whisper about this, if you bother Jennings again, I can't guarantee your safety, or the safety of your little pets." He tapped the hard drive in Liam's hand. "It's been wiped, by the way, completely blank. Just like your future if you don't listen to me." With that parting shot, Miller got in his vehicle and drove away, leaving Liam standing alone on the sidewalk, holding a useless piece of plastic. The brick wall he'd run into wasn't just solid, it was invisible and everywhere. He had tried to fight the system, and the system had not only beaten him, it had mocked him for trying. He had been outmaneuvered, threatened, and stripped of his only weapon. He stared at the blank hard drive, the symbol of his complete and utter powerlessness. He had lost. The corruption had won. And in that moment, under the gray sky of Northwood Creek, Liam felt a loneliness deeper than any he had ever known. He wasn't just alone, he was an outcast in a world he no longer recognized. Liam didn't return to his violated house. He stayed at the clinic, a ghost haunting the sterile hallways. Dr. Eris had cleared out a back storage room, turning it into a new secure den for the puppies, away from the front windows. Liam sat on the cold floor of that room, his back against the wall, the blank hard drive resting beside him like a tombstone. He was a burned-out building, a collapsed frame of a man. Everything inside his belief, his hope, his righteous rage had been incinerated, leaving only the ash of defeat. Miller's words played on a vicious loop in his mind. "Did you really think? Don't throw it all away. Just like your future if you don't listen to me." He was right. How naive he had been. A small-town firefighter against a machine greased with money and power. He had brought a knife to a gunfight, and now even the knife was broken. "Give up," a tired voice whispered in his head. "Just give up. This isn't your fight. Take the puppies. Move to another town where no one knows you and start over. Survive. That's all you can do." The thought was seductive. It promised peace. It promised safety. He might lose his job, his house, but he would have his life and the lives of the tiny creatures he'd grown to love. Was it cowardice or was it sanity? Dr. Eris entered the room, his face etched with worry. "Liam, you have to eat something," he said softly. "You can't just sit here." Liam shook his head, not bothering to look up. "They won. Eris, the game's over." "It's only over when we say it is," Aris countered, frustration coloring his tone. "This is exactly what they want. Liam, they want you to feel hopeless. They want you to quit. Don't give them the satisfaction." But Eris's words couldn't penetrate the thick fog of despair that surrounded Liam. He was beaten. He knew it in his bones. He sat there, lost in his own misery, staring at nothing. 6 of the puppies were in a contented sleeping pile, their tiny bodies rising and falling in rhythm. But one of them wasn't. Hope. She. The weakest. The smallest. The one he had fought hardest to keep alive was pulling herself up on her still wobbly legs. She staggered away from the warmth of her siblings, each step a testament of will. She made the seemingly epic journey across the cold floor. She came right to Liam. She stopped before him, tilted her tiny head, and looked up at him with eyes that were still a milky puppy blue. And then she did something he had never heard her do before. She barked. It wasn't a real bark. It was a tiny, reedy, high-pitched yip, like the squeak of a squeezed toy. It was a small, almost insignificant sound in the stillness of the room. But to Liam, it was a thunderclap, that tiny, defiant sound cut through his sheath of despair. It wasn't a cry of fear or pain. It was the sound of existence. A declaration. I am here. I fought. I am not finished. Liam slowly lowered his gaze and looked at the tiny creature who had overcome impossible odds. She should have died in the rain. She should have died from cold and starvation. She should have died in his arms that first night. She should have died of fright when the intruder broke in. She had every reason in the world to be broken, to give up. But she wasn't. Her spirit was intact. And in that moment, something profound shifted inside Liam. He had been so focused on the overwhelming power of the enemy that he had forgotten the power of what he was fighting for. He had stared into the abyss of corruption and had let it stare back into him, poisoning him with its nihilism. But Hope wasn't looking at the abyss. She was simply barking at it. His despair began to recede. Not slowly, but burned away by something far more primal and powerful. A new rage. Not the hot rage of before, but a cold, focused fury. It was the indignation of a protector. How dare he consider giving up when she had not? His surrender would render her fight for survival meaningless. It would be the ultimate betrayal. Liam slowly reached out and gently stroked Hope's head. She leaned into his hand, a tiny being of unshakable faith. He looked up at Eris, and the older vet saw the fire was back in his eyes, brighter and more dangerous than ever. "You were right," Liam said, his voice steady and clear. He picked up the blank hard drive from the floor. "They can erase this. They can close investigations. They can threaten us." He gestured toward the 7 puppies. "But they can't erase what we know. And they can't erase them." He stood up, his body no longer heavy with defeat, but taut with new energy. He was no longer the victim. He was done reacting. "If the system won't deliver justice," he said. A new, audacious, dangerous plan forming in his mind. "Then we bypass the system. We can't fight them in the dark. They own the dark. We have to drag them into the light." He looked at Eris, a thin, cold smile on his lips. "Richard Jennings loves to throw parties. He loves to show off his wealth and power. I think it's time we crashed one." The fire was reignited, not to fight a corrupt system, but to honor the unbroken spirit of a tiny puppy who refused to be broken. Liam would not be broken. He would become the storm. The back storage room of the veterinary clinic had become a war room. The despair had been purged, replaced by a tense, focused energy that was palpable in the air. Liam and Eris, two men from two different worlds, were now a single unit, bonded by one goal to expose the rot they had uncovered. On a metal table between bags of dog food and medical supplies, they laid out their plan. "Your idea is audacious." "Liam," Eris said, stroking his graying beard. "But it's also incredibly dangerous. We're talking about breaking and entering, trespassing. If we're caught, Jennings won't just sue us, he'll bury us." "He already tried," Liam countered, his voice cold. "The difference is, now we're hitting back. We can't beat him at his own game. We can't use the rules when he owns the referee and the rulebook. We have to upend the whole table." He pointed to a glossy flyer he'd picked up from a local coffee shop. It advertised the social event of the season, the 5th annual Viridian Kennels Charity Gala. A beaming photo of Richard Jennings graced the cover, next to a perfect-looking golden retriever. "This is our battlefield," Liam said. "Where he is weakest and most confident, his public image." The plan began to take shape, a daring strategy born of desperation and resolve. The objective, not merely to reveal the truth, but to do so in the most undeniable and humiliating way possible. They wouldn't leak it to a newspaper that could be silenced. They would broadcast the horror directly to a captive audience of Jennings's wealthiest and most powerful supporters, at the very event meant to glorify him. "We're going to show them the discard room," Liam said, the name Clara had given it sounding sinister. "While Jennings is on stage pontificating about animal welfare, we're going to replace his presentation with something a little more honest. The equipment heiress, with his knowledge of medical technology, had an idea. "I have a wireless video endoscope," he explained. "It's smaller than your thumb, has a high-definition camera, and a battery that will last for hours. We can detach it from the flexible tube. Its signal is encrypted and can be picked up by a special receiver connected to a laptop." They also needed a way to hijack the gala's audio-visual system. Liam, familiar with fire alarm and security systems in commercial buildings, suspected the AV setups for events like this were often hastily installed, with default passwords and unsecured ports. A few hours of online research confirmed it, with physical access to the projector or the control board. Switching the input source would be surprisingly easy. Infiltration and diversion, this was the riskiest part, and it broke down into two distinct roles. Liam would be the infiltrator. "I'll go in during the chaos of the gala setup," he strategized. "Dozens of caterers, technicians, florists will be coming and going. I'll get a uniform for one of the contract companies and slip in. I'll plant the modified camera in the discard room. Position it for a clear view of the whole room. Eris's role was the diversion." "I'll attend the gala as a guest," the veterinarian said. "I get an invitation every year, usually. I throw it in the trash." This time, he would accept. He would dress the part, mingle. At the crucial moment, just before Liam needs to activate the feed, "I'll create a disturbance. I'll approach Jennings or his head of security and report a fabricated veterinary emergency. One of his prize champion dogs is suddenly having a seizure. It will pull them away for a few precious minutes." The trigger, as Jennings took the stage for his keynote speech, and Eris's diversion was underway. Liam, now at a safe location off-property, would be on a laptop equipped with the special receiver. He would activate the feed from the hidden camera. The video signal would then be rerouted instead of slides of happy puppies. The grand screens in the ballroom would show a live, cold, brutal view of the room where Viridian's errors were eliminated. They sat back, looking at their plan. It was complex, dangerous, and everything could go wrong. A vigilant caterer, an overzealous security guard, a changed password, a weak wireless signal, any one of a dozen variables could doom the entire thing and land them in prison. Or worse, if this goes wrong, Eris began, his voice grave. "I know," Liam interrupted. "But if we do nothing, he wins. Our silence makes us his accomplices." I can't live with that. He looked over at the puppies, sleeping in blissful ignorance. Hope let out a yawn, exposing her small pink belly. They were what was at stake. Not just these 7 lives, but all the others that would share their fate if Jennings wasn't stopped. The plan was set. The fight was no longer about self-preservation. It was about justice. They were not vigilantes seeking revenge. They were surgeons preparing to excise a tumor from the heart of their town. Liam looked at Eris, his unlikely co-conspirator. No more words were needed. Eris gave a slow, deliberate nod. The clock was now ticking toward the gala, and toward the confrontation that would decide everything. The night of the gala arrived, carrying with it a cold, anticipatory dread. In Eris's clinic, the 2 men performed a final check of the tools of their war. The endoscope camera, freed from its tube, looked small and harmless. A tiny metallic eye that would soon bear witness to unspeakable crimes. Liam tested the battery, confirmed the strong signal on the laptop that would serve as his command center. Everything was ready. "Once you're in, don't take any chances," Eris said. His voice tense. He was wearing an expensive suit, looking thoroughly uncomfortable and out of place. "Plant the camera and get out. Nothing else matters." Liam nodded, his face a mask of calm focus. "When you see I'm clear, you go in and play the part, be a guest, and keep your phone on vibrate." There was no handshake, no dramatic farewell. A shared nod, a silent understanding was enough. Then they separated Eris to drive to the gala as an invited guest, Liam to a nearby mall parking lot, where he transformed. He shed his civilian clothes and donned the uniform he'd bought for cash from a supply store black polo shirt and black trousers. With the embroidered logo of Elite Evening Catering on the chest, he pulled on a baseball cap and tucked the camera and small tools into a professional-looking tool pouch. In the rearview mirror, a stranger looked back, just another event worker, invisible in the hustle of a major function. He drove to a service road near Viridian Kennels. He could already hear the sounds of the party being assembled, the testing of classical music, the clinking of champagne flutes, the laughter of staff setting up tents. This was the chaos he needed. Taking a deep breath, he exited his truck, slung the tool pouch over his shoulder, and walked directly toward the service entrance. He walked with purpose, shoulders back, eyes forward, mimicking the gait of the dozens of other workers scurrying around him. A security guard at the gate gave him a cursory nod, his attention diverted by a florist van trying to back up. Liam was in. The first step was complete. The atmosphere was surreal. Before him, on the vast lawn, elegance was being constructed. Tables draped in crisp white linen, glistening ice sculptures, and the first of the guests, dressed in evening gowns and tuxedos, were beginning to arrive. But to Liam, it was all a thin, fragile veneer over the rot beneath. He circled around the back of the main building, away from the lights and music, toward the private section where the animals were kept. He used his knowledge of building layouts to find a little-used side door, one that led to the basement service corridors. As he'd gambled, it had been propped open with a block of wood by a kitchen worker for easy access. He slipped inside. The temperature immediately dropped, and the air grew heavy with the smell of disinfectant and an imperceptible sadness. The party music was muffled, a distant, thumping bass line. This was the dark side of Viridian. He moved quickly and quietly through the dimly lit corridors, his boots making no sound on the concrete floor. He passed the office where they'd found the evidence, its door now securely locked. Finally, he came to the end of a short, dead-end hallway. There it was, a plain metal door with no handle, only a heavy sliding bolt. No label, no sign. The discard room, his heart pounding. He drew the bolt. The door creaked open. He stepped inside and closed it behind him, plunging himself into a cold silence. The room was worse than he had imagined. It was like a surgical theater stripped of all healing. The walls were tiled in white from floor to ceiling. The floor sloped to a central drain. In the middle of the room stood a stainless steel examination table, its surface scratched and dented. An industrial faucet with a long hose hung over a deep utility sink. And the smell. The scent of bioscrub was overpowering here. A sharp chemical tang that failed to mask the truth of what happened in this room. In a corner, there was a stack of empty cardboard boxes, identical to the one he had found his puppies in. For a moment, the horror of the room threatened to swallow him. He pictured tiny, confused lives being brought in here, the warmth of their mothers replaced by the cold of steel and tile. He shook his head, forcing himself to focus. He was here to do a job. He scanned the room, looking for the perfect vantage point. He saw it, high on the wall, near the ceiling, was a metal ventilation grate. It had a clear, unobstructed view down onto the steel table. He pulled over a stool, carefully removed the screws holding the grate with a multi-tool. Inside, there was a small, dusty space. He took out the tiny camera, switched it on, and tucked it deep inside the ductwork, its tiny lens peering through the slats of the grate. He pulled a small handheld monitor from his pouch and checked the feed. Perfect. A clear, cold view of the stage of horrors below. He was just fitting the grate back into place when he heard it. Footsteps in the hallway, just outside. Panic flared in his throat. He quickly pushed the stool back to the corner, dived into an empty supply closet, and pulled the door almost shut, leaving only a sliver of an opening. His heart felt like it was trying to batter its way out of his ribcage. The door to the room creaked open. 2 men in Viridian security uniforms stepped inside. "You sure you heard something down here?" One said. "Positive," said the other. "Probably just rats. Jennings would have a fit if we had rats." They swept their flashlights around the room. The beam slid across the closet where Liam held his breath. He could see their boots just feet from his hiding place. An eternity seemed to pass. "Nothing here." The first one said, "Let's go. The party's about to start." They left, slamming the metal door and sliding the bolt home. Liam was locked in, after a few seconds of panic. He realized this was actually a blessing. No one else would be coming in here. He was safe until he needed to leave. He waited another 10 minutes in the dark, until he was sure they were long gone. Then he pulled out his phone. He sent a simple text message to Eris. "The eye is open, outside, in the glittering light and music." He knew Aris would receive it. The trap was set. The show was about to begin, and Richard Jennings's entire world was about to burn. Outside the discard room, the gala was in full swing. Dr. Eris stood at the back of the ballroom, holding a glass of champagne he hadn't touched, feeling nauseated by the spectacle of hypocrisy. The wealthiest and most powerful people in Northwood Creek laughed and chattered, nibbling on expensive canapes while mere yards away. A horrifying truth lay hidden. He saw Chief Miller near the stage, schmoozing, a wolf in the uniform of a shepherd. Eris's phone vibrated in his pocket. One message. The eye is open. A jolt of cold adrenaline shot through him. Liam was successful. Now, the rest was up to him. A few minutes later, a round of thunderous applause erupted as Richard Jennings took the stage. He looked radiant, the very picture of success and benevolence. He stood at the podium, and the large screens behind him displayed the Viridian Kennels logo. "Ladies and gentlemen, fellow animal lovers," Jennings began, his voice booming through the room. "It is a privilege to welcome you all to our annual celebration of excellence and ethics." Eris quietly pulled a small tablet from his inner coat pocket. The screen showed a simple interface Liam had set up for him. There was only one large, red button. Because here at Viridian, we believe that every creature deserves a perfect start. Jennings continued, his smile widening. "Our commitment to integrity, to producing only the very best, is unshakable." That was Eris's cue. With a hand that trembled only slightly, he pressed the red button. On stage, The screens behind Jennings flickered for a second. The Viridian logo vanished. It was replaced by a completely different image. A live image. It was a cold, white-tiled room, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. The audience fell quiet. Confused, was this part of the presentation? Then, the door in the video opened. A uniformed kennel worker entered. He was carrying a cardboard box. A murmur went through the room. The worker placed the box on the metal table in the center of the room and opened it. The camera, perfectly positioned, showed a litter of tiny, squirming puppies inside. A sympathetic awe rippled through some of the guests, but the sympathy turned to horror. The worker began his task with cold indifference. He picked up one puppy, examined it roughly, then tossed it back into the box. He took out an unlabeled bottle of solution and a syringe. Gasps spread through the ballroom. People were beginning to realize what they were watching. This wasn't a presentation. This was something monstrous. Jennings, having lost his momentum to the sudden silence, turned around. He saw the image on the screen, his secret room, his crimes being broadcast for the world to see. His face went from confusion to disbelief, then to a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "Turn it off!" he hissed at a stunned technician at the side of the stage. "Turn it off, now!" In the discard room, Liam, still locked in the closet, heard the muffled shouts from outside. And then, he heard another sound, much closer. The crackle of the in-room worker's walkie-talkie. "Stan! What the hell is going on? Kill the camera now." The kennel worker? Stan froze, looking around the room in a panic. He looked up, his eyes seeming to lock onto the ventilation grate where the camera was hidden. The metal door to the discard room was yanked open. Richard Jennings stormed in, his face a contorted mask of fury. His wild eyes scanned the room and landed on the supply closet. He lunged for it and ripped the door open, revealing Liam huddled inside. "You!" Jennings roared, launching himself at Liam like a wounded animal. They crashed together in the confined space. A desperate, violent struggle. Jennings, blind with fury, slammed Liam against a metal shelf lined with chemical bottles, the drums of bioscrub and other solvents. The bottles tumbled to the floor, shattering, their flammable contents spreading in a pool. In the struggle, a faulty work lamp was knocked from the shelf. It hit the concrete floor, and a shower of sparks erupted as its frayed cord made contact with the chemical pool. There was a deafening whoosh. The fire erupted with terrifying speed, a wall of blue and orange flame consuming the spilled chemicals. The small room was instantly an inferno. The fire alarms, ironically, began to shriek, their sound echoing through the facility. Thick, black, toxic smoke billowed to the ceiling, making the air unbreathable. Stan, the worker, screamed and scrambled out of the room. Jennings, taken by surprise by the fire, recoiled, but it was too late. A burning beam fell, pinning his leg to the floor, and he collapsed with a scream of agony. Liam, the firefighter, reacted on pure instinct. Smoke. Fire. A trapped man, this was his world. He tore a piece of his shirt, covered his mouth and nose, and dropped low to the floor where the air was clearer. He saw Jennings, his enemy, the man who had broken his spirit, being consumed by the flames. A dark part of him wanted to leave him there. Let him burn in the hell he had created. Let justice be served. But then he saw Jennings's eyes no longer the eyes of a monster, but of a terrified man facing his own mortality. And the firefighter's creed won. His duty was not to judge, it was to save, pushing through the heat and his own hatred. Liam surged forward. He heaved the burning beam up just enough to pull Jennings free. Jennings was nearly unconscious from pain and smoke inhalation, half carrying, half dragging his tormentor. Liam began to pull him toward the door. The heat was immense, every breath a searing pain. He could feel his skin blistering, his lungs screaming for air. He stumbled out of the doorway, out of the inferno, and collapsed into the hallway, dragging Jennings with him, he was met by a scene of chaos. The gala guests were screaming and evacuating and running toward him, fire extinguishers in hand. Were Chief Miller and other security staff, but Liam didn't look at them. He looked past them, toward the exit, where he could see the flashing red and blue lights of the arriving fire trucks. His own crew. He had saved the monster, but as he lay there, gasping in the smoke, he knew he had also destroyed him. Richard Jennings's empire was collapsing around him, consumed by the very flames his own cruelty had ignited 6 months later. Summer had come to Northwood Creek, bringing a warmth that seemed intent on cleansing the cold memories of winter. The charred ruins of Viridian Kennels were fenced off, a silent monument to a fallen empire. The name that was once a symbol of prestige was now synonymous with shame. The story had exploded beyond the confines of their small town. The Gala of Horrors, as the press had dubbed it, became a national headline, exposed so humiliatingly before his wealthiest supporters. Richard Jennings had nowhere left to hide, facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence and a public outcry. He, recovering from severe burns, was indicted on a host of federal charges for fraud, conspiracy, and large-scale animal cruelty. Chief Thomas Miller had been forced to resign in disgrace. An investigation into his finances had uncovered years of corruption, and he too was facing justice. The town, shocked and ashamed, was in the slow, painful process of looking at itself in the mirror. Dr. Eris's clinic had become a hub for change, flooded with donations and volunteers who wanted to make a difference. But for Liam, those battles were now in the past. He stood in his sunny backyard, a space that had once been an empty, unloved patch of grass. Now, it was teeming with life. The lawn was worn in patches from happy, chasing paws, and a chewed-up tennis ball lay under a rose bush. A chorus of happy barks drew his attention. The 7 puppies, now healthy, energetic young dogs were playing in the grass. Cole, Patch, Rocky, Pip, Shadow, and Copper. They weren't his anymore. After the story broke, adoption offers had poured in from across the country, with Eris's help. Liam had carefully vetted dozens of applicants, finding the perfect homes for 6 of his survivors. They were here today for a reunion Eris had organized. Liam's house was no longer silent. It was repaired. The scars of the break-in erased, and it was filled with laughter, barks, and love. He no longer dreaded walking through his own front door. A cold, wet nose nudged his hand, and he smiled. Looking down, Hope was there, always by his side. She would forever be smaller than her siblings. And when she ran, there was an almost imperceptible hitch in her gait, a permanent reminder of her fragile start. But her eyes were bright, intelligent, and full of an unshakable devotion to the man who had saved her. He had officially adopted her, a decision that had required no thought at all. Liam sat down on the grass, and Hope immediately climbed into his lap. Curling up with a contented sigh, he had his own scars, a patch of shiny, slightly discolored skin on his forearm where the fire had licked him, and there were the scars inside. From the betrayal and the raw truth of the world, but they didn't hurt anymore. They were not symbols of being broken, but of being resilient. They were proof that he had walked into the fire and had come out the other side, not unscathed, but transformed. The loneliness that had defined him had been replaced by the chaotic, joyful mess of a life with purpose. He had found his meaning not in fighting great fires, but in a discarded cardboard box on a lonely road. Dr. Eris came out into the yard, carrying 2 cold beers. He handed one to Liam and sat down beside him on the grass. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the dogs play, enjoying their new, hard-won peace. "They look happy," Eris said. "They deserve to be," Liam replied, his hand stroking Hope's soft fur unconsciously. They had done it. 2 ordinary men had stood up to a corrupt system and had, somehow, won They hadn't just saved 7 small lives, they had brought hope to countless others as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Liam looked at his friend, at the tumbling dogs, and at the loyal creature asleep in his lap. His house was full. His heart was full. The lonely firefighter had found his family in the ashes of deceit. And at last, he was at peace.